The other site is just right after mine is James Montgomery,
right.
And that will go a lot more into the Crown, and because he is doing a lot of the research in that, and I let him do that, and I just kept on going on the taxes and the rest of the history and putting it together. But Montgomery is an excellent researcher on that. In fact, I emailed you something over.
Yes.
The other day on that.
If you do go to the homepage of atgpress.com, which stands for Against the Grain, you can read his works. If you click on the link stated as Knowledge is Freedom, which is the upper one on the right-hand column. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but just off the top of your head, do you know whether James has in the past or was willing perhaps to do some interviews?
I don't know. He was over here, and as I said, he was a truck driver, and he's been put off of the road because he's got high sugar, and they can't drive with high sugar.
I see. Ooh.
So right now, until he gets the sugar under control, he's sitting home, and that's the reason why he came up for a visit. And I briefly mentioned to him about the radio show, and as long as he's home, I think maybe he just might.
All right, excellent. And I would ask you to broker that if you could, and I'll
Sure.
follow up on your directions. Thank you very much for doing that.
Okay.
Now back to business. You were about to read to us.
Okay, the Barron versus Baltimore. That is 7 Peters, 243, 8 Lawyers Edition, 672. It's an 1833 case. All right. Chief Justice John Marshall delivered the opinion of the court. Here's one of the things he said. The Constitution was ordained and established by the people of the United States for themselves, for their own government, and not for the government of the individual states. Each state established the Constitution for itself, and in that Constitution provided such limitations and restrictions on the powers of its particular government as its judgment dictated. The people of the United States framed such a government for the United States as they supposed best adapted to their situation and best calculated to promote their interests. Now that says a lot. And in here it said, it's worthy to remark, too, that these inhibitions generally restrain state legislation on subjects entrusted to the general government or in which the people of all the states feel an interest. Now, what they're talking about there is the ex post facto law and the 9th section, restriction on state regulation, which was no state shall, blah, 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 blah. That's the only other part. Now, when they come down, see, John Barron was in Maryland, and when the government did something in their wharf there, they created a situation where in paving the streets of Baltimore, it diverted their streams and everything, and the sand and gravel was deposited near Barron's Wharf. So he sued them out, and the decision in the Barron said has left an indelible impression on the development of civil rights. While today Barron would have brought his case under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, the process of change by which parts of the Bill of Rights have come to be applicable to the states has been slow, uncertain, and confusing. While most rights in the Bill of Rights now do apply to the states, they do so only because they are essential to due process of law. Therefore, when anybody comes in and institutes the Bill of Rights, you know what they say, don't bring that up in my court.
But do you find that, I wasn't paying attention, before 2000. But even since that time that I have been paying attention, it seems that these complaints come up more and more often. Now, is that just a flaw in my observation? Or
no, it's been there. Well, I don't know if you say a flaw in your observation, but if you don't follow the cases like we do, you wouldn't know. And there's, I don't know how many cases that come back, and I have them on my computer, and I wrote an article, I think, on that, on the Constitutional. I don't know if it's on HEG Press or not, but I do have it. It's quite lengthy, and it goes through every case that I dug up on the John Barron, and you can shepherdize the John Barron case, and you can follow all the cases all the way up and go to the library and pull every one of them, and it's right there.
Okay.
And it just, every one of the cases says it has not been overturned to this day, and the last case I saw was the year 2000. So right there, when you look at the term United States, all it means is doing business as, or AKA, Congress. Because it says Congress assembled in the United States. And the same way as the President, when he's announced, he is announced the President of the United States. It's not the President of the United States of America. Because if that were to happen, he would have to okay every one of the 50 governors' legislation. He'd be the top man it would go through. But he's not. He is the President of the United States. You just look on TV whenever he's announced, not the President of the United States of America. He's the President of the United States.
But then what does that say about the relationship to the states then?
That says that the states, at one time, were supposedly, or this is what the myth is, independent. But they're not, because remember, the Crown Temple owns them all. Even the United States, even the Maryland and Virginia, which turned over part of their property or state to the Congress, was still all owned by the Crown Temple.
You know, I looked up that definition of state in Black's.
Uh-huh.
I had that 6th edition, which we talked about in that last show.
Oh, okay.
But you know what's interesting too, and this goes back to the notion of what a state was prior to the Civil War.
Uh-huh.
And it describes it as being capable of entering into international relations with other communities of the globe.
Yeah. Now, why would that happen when a state was supposed to be forbidden in the United States Constitution to attack piracy on the high seas and all this other stuff, and that it couldn't create or start a war with a foreign country? Well, simply because they're all owned by the Crown Temple. So they can do whatever they want.
So in other words, in one sense, they were allowed to do commerce.
Right.
But they could not do, I guess, battle or...
Right. They couldn't declare war against France. New York couldn't declare war against France. It would have to be the United States declare the war against France. And Florida couldn't stop someone on the high seas for piracy. It would have to be the United States. The state only went out 3 miles, and the United States went out as far as the international boundaries would let them go.
All right, so the United States went from that 3-mile demarcation point to the international waters.
Right.
We don't even know about that today, though, do we?
Nope.
We don't even look at 3 miles belonging to a particular state, do we?
Nope.
Okay.
People have no idea.
Okay.
So now, okay, let's get back to when you read Article 5, it says to provide for the restitution of all the states' rights and properties which have been confiscated belonging to real British subjects, end quote. That means the Crown Colonies were granted to persons and corporations of the Crown Temple through letters, patents, and charters, and the North American colonial land was owned by the Crown. The catch-all is in Article 4. It is agreed that creditors on either side shall meet with no lawful impediment to the recovery of the full value of sterling money of all bona fide debts heretofore contracted. Okay, so that means that since the Crown and its Templars represented both the United States as debtors and the Crown as the creditors, then they became the creditor of the American people by owning all the debts of the former colonies, now called the legal Crown states. Now, sounds too good to be true, but the word scam and hoodwink can't begin to describe what has taken place. So, what debts were owed by the Crown Temple and their banks as of 1883 in the contract between the King and the 13 United States of North America signed in Versailles, July 16, 1782, in Article 1. Here's what it states. It is agreed and certified that the sum advanced by His Majesty to the Congress of the United States under the title of a loan in the years 1778, 79, 80, 81, and the present 1782 amount to the sum of 18 million of livres, money of France, according to following 21 receipts of the above-mentioned underwritten Minister of Congress, given in virtue of his powers to wit. That's a quote. Now you know where the money is still owed. It's infinite. It will never drop off. That amount equals to $18 million plus interest that Hamilton's U.S. Central Bank owed the Crown through the Crown Bank loans of France. And this was signed, remember, by Benjamin Franklin, who was the Middle Templar of the ongoing on the taxes and the rest of the history and, you know, putting it together. But Montgomery is an excellent researcher on that. In fact, I emailed you something over the other day on that.
If you do go to the homepage of atgpress.com, which stands for Against the Grain.
The other site is just right after mine, is James Montgomery,
right.
And that will go a lot more into the Crown, and because he is doing a lot of the research in that, and I let him do that, and I just buy sugar.
I see. Ooh.
So right now, until he gets the sugar under control, he's sitting home, and that's the reason why he came up for a visit. And I briefly mentioned to him about the radio show, and as long as he's home,
you can read his works. If you click on the link stated as Knowledge is Freedom, which is the upper one on the right-hand column. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but just off the top of your head, do you know whether James has in the past or is willing perhaps to do some interviews?
I don't know. He was over here, and as I said, he was a truck driver, and he's been put off of the road because he's got high sugar, and they can't drive with high